Welcome to the SmartTechCheck Podcast, hosted by Mark Vina, your home for candid, insightful, and provocative conversations about the smart home automation, security, smartphones, PC and console gaming, and much more.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Vina, host of the SmartTechCheck Podcast. Today is Tuesday, October 26, 2021. Joining me for today's super duper podcast is my usual trio of stalwart tech journalists, Rob Pedalero, who writes for Wirecutter, The Verge, and USA Today, John Quain, who writes for the New York Times, Smart Cities, and Tom's Guide, and the irrepressible Stuart Walpin, who scribes for Twice and Laptop Magazine. Gentlemen, good afternoon, and how are you?
Very well.
Good, wet.
Hey. How's the weather on the East Coast? It's not too bad in San Jose here, but how's New York?
It's raining.
Is it raining?
Yeah.
We had a rain last night. I hear you all got some rain in the Bay Area.
Yes, and it's been badly needed, as you know. I mean, in fact, my garage, I live in a loft apartment type building, and it actually did get some water. Which they're not used to, obviously, out here because it doesn't rain very often here in San Jose or in Northern California. But the rain's been well needed, and now it's kind of, we get into this time of the year, and the weather's still very nice, but it's still overcast, and it's not the kind of bright, shiny, sunny days that populate most of the summer and most of the spring. But before we get into the topics, I got to ask you guys a question. What's your thoughts on the World Series? Any predictions before the? You're laughing. Are you going to watch the World Series? Maybe I should start with that question.
I really am torn about who I'm rooting for.
Yeah.
Houston for the more general impact of 2017, but I'm a Mets fan. How could I possibly root for Atlanta? And I have a feeling that Rob is the same way. How could either one of us possibly root for Atlanta? So I think both Rob and I are sort of on the horn of a dilemma here.
My National League East brother has this right. Yeah, I mean, Atlanta, they're a division rival. No, I can't. Houston, granted, we beat him in 2019, so that's all good here. It would be nice to see Dusty Baker, hoist the trophy at some point.
Yep.
If we can just remember, when you take your starting pitcher out, you take the ball from him. You don't let him walk off the mound with it.
By the way, Dusty Baker really is a great coach. He really is I mean, I don't know if he gets the respect, which is crazy because he's had so much success, but he really is a great coach, and he was a terrific player. Well,
I think if Houston wins the series, this will be his ticket to the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. Oh, I think so. John, are you going to watch the World Series, or are you just?
I'm wondering, is Verstappen driving for Houston? I don't think so. No, I'm much more Formula One and NFL right now. That's sort of got my mindset, taken over as much brain activity as I can assign to sports.
Well, being the true Yankee fan that I am, as soon as the Yankees lost to the Red Sox a couple of weeks ago, my interest in baseball went from 100% down to 2%. And now that the Giants are marching on to the Super Bowl with that fantastic win on Sunday, they just have to win 9 more games in a row, and they'll be great.
Yeah, I got to know. I won't be able to watch after first 3 games anyways because I will be out of town across the Atlantic in Lisbon for Web Summit, and the time zones just do not work out for watching night baseball in either Houston or Atlanta.
Well, I could talk about baseball forever, as you know, but or the first computers that we ever had that we were chatting about before we got online, before the call began. But let's definitely want to get into the podcast. So let's do that. Okay. This is not a complete surprise, but Samsung announced Matter's smart home support via SmartThings, which is their own. It's not proprietary, but in a way it's proprietary. But it's Samsung's branded smart home protocol kit, not kit, but support standard. I want to start with Stuart. So I don't. You don't come across to me as kind of a hardcore smart home guy, But I mean, do you follow stuff like this? I mean, I know you do as part of your work, but I mean, would it motivate you to buy a Samsung appliance because they now have Matter support. It's going to be more broadly compatible with HomeKit and Alexa and Google Assistant. I mean, give me some sense of what if you think this is a significant thing from your perspective and from an industry's perspective as well.
Well, this to me is still vaporware. There still haven't been any products, and everything is about execution. And right now, I'm looking at this as sort of kumbaya. It's all of these vicious competitors all of a sudden deciding to create a UN of smart home technology. And until I actually see it working, just put me in the I don't believe it column. I just think there are so many issues and conflicts between these companies, not only the walled gardens, but all sorts of privacy issues. And, it's just, there are just, I think, so many hurdles to overcome to get to where the utopian place that Matter is supposed to get us to with that triple arrow logo. These products are still going to be festooned with all these other logos and compatibility things. So the simplification is right now adding one more logo to the list that consumers don't know what it is. So until it actually gets out there, until I see how it actually works, whether or not I need a breach for some things and not for another, if there's a unified app that I could use, until I see exactly how it's all going to work, I'm going to remain tech cynical.
So, John, the question I have for you is that the Matter initiative has been out there for several months, so that's not new news. They made some news a couple of months ago when they announced that there would not be any Matter branded devices out there or Matter supported devices until next year. But it took Samsung a long time to get to today when they made this announcement. Does that surprise you? You think Samsung was trying to extract a better deal, although the committee that manages Matter is not a public company. They're a standards body, so I don't know what they could possibly have been negotiating. But did that surprise you that it took so long for Samsung to get on board?
It didn't surprise me, actually, because they've sort of gone their own way on several different fronts in terms of smart home devices and compatibility and different standards and their own software and that sort of thing. And it makes sense if you've been to Korea and you understand how these companies work, where you have sort of products in every category and making them completely fit. They have everything from air conditioners and refrigerators to televisions and phones. So making that all work together is kind of their view, and it's not surprising that it would take them a while to support yet another standard. But I think it is significant in the sense that, most people a lot of people have Samsung TVs or have some Samsung appliance in their home. And you kind of want this stuff to work with best of breed. Right. It's why Apple has sort of failed at this idea, right? Because nobody's going to buy an Apple front door lock. That's just not a thing. Ring is like questionable. It was on its own. But once you have Honeywell and Schlage as a lock company and companies like that joining it, then, well, that's great. Then when I go into Home Depot, or I can buy whatever product I think is the best one in that category. But I'm like Stuart, we don't have any products, and I have like 40 in my house, all on the network, and they're all different. They don't talk to each other. So I'll believe it, sometime next year, hopefully.
Well, you made a good point, John, because if the reason why the Samsung seal of approval or their participation in the Matter initiative is important is that they do have a pretty heavyweight presence in smartphones, number one, but also with appliances as well. I don't know what their share is off the top of my head, but it's not trivial. And I think that the interesting thing to me, vis-a-vis the appliance element of the discussion is that there really hasn't been compelling usage models that have come out of, well, I want a refrigerator that's a smart home device, or an oven that's a smart home device. Right. I mean, there is some interesting things there, but it's not so compelling that people would go out and buy a $4,000 refrigerator just because it's smart home compliant, and I can I think Samsung has a camera built into it, allows you to detect, if you're out of milk, or if your milk is going bad. But Rob, did this news surprise you?
So I think it was going to happen. I think this is a case where, to the extent people realize that there are these different standards at all, they want to know that what they buy is going to be compatible. Like, nobody worries that this electric appliance you buy will work when you plug it into the outlet. Assuming you didn't, it's not some gray market thing from the EU. So we need to get to that point with smart home stuff. And this is a necessary step, but it's not enough by itself. Like the fridge is, it's funny you mentioned milk. I was just running over to the grocery store because if you have a kid at home, you're always running out of that. That I'm not compelled to get a connected fridge, but we do have an ancient thermostat where it actually would help to have one connected. Yeah. And I want to know that whatever one I buy, I am going to actually look for that logo on there just in case, because it's one way I can try to buy down the risk a little bit of getting locked into some stupid closed ecosystem, which happens all the time. I mean, we can't even agree on what plug an electric car should take to recharge. So we're doing better than that here. That's nice.
Well, I'll just close off on this particular topic, going back to something that Stuart said, is that I think early next year is going to be critical for the Connectivity Standards Alliance, the CSA, which oversees the Matter initiative, because if devices don't start to show up in early next year, I think people are going to say, ho hum, hey, you guys have been out there for a year, you've already made one cancellation, and pushed, and I think people have short attention spans. So I think that they better show up in January at CES with, hey, we have a flagship smart home device that's now compliant with Matter, and it can work across multiple protocols. Let us start talking about, and this is your topic, Rob. Biden announced a bunch of key nominations for the FCC. Before we go, Rob, into your view on this topic, maybe it's helpful to explain to the audience why this is important, because it is important. It's not just, hey, it's a bunch of guys, with government jobs. So the FCC does have a very significant role in our lives from a technology standpoint.
Yes, it is perhaps the most important agency in terms of how the government regulates technology, because the FCC, by statute, when you have new 5G bands available that give your phone better service, that's because the FCC ran a spectrum auction, found some spectrum, freed it up, sold it to the carriers, made a bunch of money for the government, meaning us. Net neutrality politics, that was all through the FCC. Just last week, the Federal Trade Commission posted a really long report about the tracking practices of a bunch of different internet providers, practices that would have been regulated had the FCC not said, nope, we're done with net neutrality rules. We're wiping out the entire foundation of them, including the privacy rules that had been written under a previous administration and had not gone into effect. That said, you would have expected in January that because the FCC is so central to tech policy, that one of the first nominations President Biden would have made would have been to fill the fifth slot. There's 5 commissioners on it. No more than 3 can be at the same party. So every time you have a new president who will make 2-3 picks from their own party if they can, 2 from the other. And one of those spots has been vacant, leaving it in a 2-2 tie between Democratic and Republican nominees, unable to do a heck of a lot. Even though, as we've seen, bandwidth has been really important. Another way the FCC is important, the emergency broadband benefit, the $50 stipend you can get to pay for connectivity, that's run through the FCC as well. Mm-hmm. So Biden has now fixed this problem by, first of all, nominating the acting chair, Jessica Rosenworcel, to be the permanent chair for a 5-year term. I think this is a great call. We were just talking about bandwidth in homes, the phrase the homework gap. Her office basically came up with it. She has been talking about this for a long time. I was looking at my notes, actually. Here is her talking about the homework gap. That strikes me as an especially cruel part of the digital divide. She said this at a trade event in 2015. So she's been paying attention to this since way before the pandemic made it painfully obvious that broadband is not equally available, and a lot of kids have a really hard time keeping up because they have no good bandwidth at home. So that's a good call. She's also been good about issues of the state of, you can't fix broadband availability if you don't know where broadband is actually available. And the FCC maps have been terrible for years. And the prior chair of the FCC, Ajit Pai, sort of didn't pay a whole lot of attention. And she pointed out, I was at some conference in DC in 2018 where she said, the information isn't right for my own house, and I'm an FCC commissioner. So I think she's paying attention to the right points. She's a capable speaker. She clearly knows the job. The other person they named is Gigi Sohn, who I should note I have known for like 20 years now. I think she's a fantastic human being. I'm glad she's on. She was the counselor with the FCC when the prior net neutrality rules were written. She is a longstanding consumer advocate. She is not a fan of leaving people subject to local monopolies, just your cable company. That's another good pick. I think both these folks should be approved. I think they're quality additions. I just wish it had not taken so long. We've gone 10 months and, it's not as if the state of broadband has been peachy keen since January.
Right. So John, are you upset that Biden didn't nominate you, John?
Yeah. It's funny because I talked to a lot of lawyers about the FCC, and they've pointed to this for quite a while as it's a big sea change for a lot of reasons, not just because of our technology focus and the things that we're concerned about in privacy and things like that, but also because of antitrust issues that they have extended from those tech companies sort of across the vertical integration that they look at now and market size and whether it will prevent a nascent company from starting up. The much broader view of antitrust issues than there have been in probably the last 30 years or so. So part of that is the result of what companies like Facebook and Google have done, right? They have gone sideways and grabbed up companies to do that sort of thing. So they're now much more concerned about that. So you're going to see some changes made, and you're going to see a lot of deals that a lot of VC people thought were just kind of automatic for the last 25 years or so are now going to take a lot longer, and some of them may not go through. So it's going to have a very direct impact, I think.
And Stuart, I know you were nominated, but you turned it down because you didn't want to move down to Washington, which I can understand.
If nominated, I will not. I will not run, and if elected, I will not serve. I like John and Rob. It's just a mystery why this took so long. Yeah. I was reading that the longest that it took before this to nominate people was like September. And here we are, we're almost in November already. And it's just, and in considering the atmosphere around broadband and the executive orders that Biden had signed that had no force of law without an effective FCC, it's just a mystery to me why this took so long. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I unlike Rob, I don't know the two commissioners. I only know them by name and reputation. But what I see is that Sohn has not always agreed with Rosenworcel on some policy, like a lot of the cable box issue. And it just occurred to me, I was reading up about her, that she's a member of the board of the directors of the Electronic Freedom Foundation and
Foundation?
What's that?
Electronic Frontier Foundation.
Frontier Foundation. Thank you. Sorry. That her approval by Congress, I'm not so sure is as assured, given her more progressive views on net neutrality and competition. It might not sit well with, shall we say, two particular Democratic senators who have already shown that they will not walk in lockstep with the rest of the Democrats. So I think Rosenworcel will probably squeak through. But Sohn's nomination, I'm not against it. I'm just saying from a purely political point of view. And she's also, by the way, against revising or getting rid of Section 230, which has got bipartisan support on the other side for. So whether or not
actually, I got to interrupt there. The FCC has nothing to do with Section 230. Trump tried to make the FCC step in and enforce it. And in a particularly disgraceful act, one of the FCC commissioners Trump nominated, Mike O'Reilly, said, this is not our job. We can't do this. And as a result,
I agree with you, Rob, but politics often centers on things that have nothing to do with politics. And if the Republicans want to paint Biden or try to disable Biden as they continually try to do, is that they could bring up Section 230, even though the FCC, and she could say the FCC has no control over it, but they could certainly use it as a political cudgel to stall her nomination and stall whatever other policies the FCC might pass once she and Rosenworcel are both approved. So I agree with you. The FCC has nothing to do with Section 230. I think it could be used simply as a political cudgel.
Well, we've got to move on. This is a terrific conversation, but the one thing I agree with all of you on is that it just blows me away that it's taken this long, because you would think, not that of all the issues that are bouncing around in Washington right now, there's, the FCC historically has had kind of a bipartisan flavor to it. That's not always been true around net neutrality. I mean, that has been kind of a divisive issue in many ways. But I think most Americans realize that we have broadband infrastructure problems, and one of the ways you kind of solve that is you get alignment by the FCC in a bipartisan way. So I don't know what maybe it's a topic we've got to return to one day, why it took so long. I mean, we're sitting here, a few weeks before Thanksgiving. You would think this would have been one of the first things that Biden could have got nailed and, chalked up an early win, and God knows he needs as many wins as he can get right now. But that's another podcast. Let's talk about, and Stuart, this is a terrific topic here, because, and God forbid what's going to happen, once this starts getting into, politicians start getting involved with politicians and algorithms. That doesn't necessarily go together, but social media apps obviously use algorithms, which are sophisticated and sometimes not so sophisticated programming methods to drive different outcomes and with analytics can observe certain behavior that you can screen out or screen in. Let me get your sense of this. Why is this such a big issue to you, Stuart? Because I know you feel pretty passionate about it.
Well, the way that Congress has been approaching this is that we need to break up big tech. And I don't think the problem is necessarily, I'm not saying it isn't, not necessarily the size of these companies, but the technologies that they use. And the primary perpetrator of all the ill that is on social media, as far as I'm concerned, are these content promoting algorithms. We just heard this week, I think the name was Carol Smith, that somebody at Facebook had created a fictional account and gave her fictional attributes of being a Christian and a conservative. And that was it. A mother, a Christian, and a conservative. And that was the only attributes that the fictional woman was given. And yet Facebook's content algorithm started feeding her all of this Q content and encouragement to join all of these conspiratorial groups and news without the account having done anything interactively to ask for that material. And so the fault is not hers, and the fault is not the content. The fault was the algorithm that pushed the content. So the question in my mind is there, and I don't think there's an answer to this, quite frankly, because Congress tends to work much more with a sledgehammer than with a scalpel, and their level of understanding of the technologies involved. I think the answer, the central focus should be on the algorithm, or algorithms, but the question is, what do you do? Can you outlaw algorithms? Is there a way of regulating algorithms? Is there a way of, because obviously advertisers would be against that because algorithms push ads to people. So I think the algorithms are the issue, or a bigger issue than the size of the companies or their irresponsibility about content moderation.
Yeah, I want to get John's view on this, but my not problem, but my observation about this topic is that algorithms don't grow by themselves. They don't develop by themselves. People write the algorithms, and it's hard for me to believe. Again, this is just me coming in and looking at it from the outside, that algorithms at either Facebook or other social sites are written such a way without knowing what the consequences might be. I really do believe that. They may never acknowledge that. Maybe we need some whistleblowers to paint some to present some evidence around that's a fact. But algorithms are not written in isolation. There's always a consequence to it. And by the way, at companies like Facebook, those algorithms are in such a way as to drive certain behavior. More profit-oriented advertising that go to certain groups that spend more money, because you can break things down that way when you have digital, when you have a digital understanding of a customer. So I'm not sure. First of all, I'm not sure it's constitutional, but you could outlaw an algorithm. And I know you agree with that, Stuart. That's probably That's a question that needs to be answered by a court. But I just wonder whether it's the motives that are the issue and not the algorithms per se. So, John, what is your take on this topic?
The algorithms are pretty rudimentary still. Even in machine learning, there are there's a bucket full of algorithms that people tend to use to do those kinds of tasks. How you integrate them and what you do with them is another matter. So it's not like people are inventing really amazingly new sophisticated algorithms every day. They're not. Mm-hmm. It's just that they're applying them in different combinations, and then it's the data. So for me, it's more about the data. They can direct me wherever they want. I mean, if they want to direct me to an advertiser, yeah, that's what marketing's all about, Charlie Brown. But it's the data that they hoover up that is completely unregulated. And a lot of it is incorrect data about you. And a lot of that data ends up being used in judicial decisions, whether you get 20 years or 5 months. That is an AI program that people have used in real life, in court. Judges use things like that. And the same goes for hiring and employment and getting into college and getting a loan. All of those things are now, they're using data that is they just hoover up. Some of it's right, some of it's wrong. You and I will never know, because it's not transparent. We don't know what they're using. So we can't even go to somebody and say, hey, that's not me. That's John Quain who committed these crimes in Colorado. By the way, there was a John Quain who committed these crimes in Colorado. Yeah. So, that to me, that's the big problem, is this use of data, and it's completely unchecked. I mean, by anybody, except for in the United States, we have HIPAA. Yeah, people will point out HIPAA, but that's not much else.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So Rob, the thing that kind of is really interesting to me about this topic is that you look at what Facebook's challenges lately with look what Apple, the impact of Apple's new privacy protocols that they implemented in iOS 15. It's had a meaningful impact on Facebook's profitability. I mean, they warned about that apparently yesterday, and that the protection levels that Apple's starting to put into their smart device operating systems are really, putting handcuffs on what Facebook can do from an advertising standpoint in terms of the precision, because that's the key. That's the name of the game in digital advertising. The more precise you are, the bigger impact you'll get from a return standpoint. So, do you see a correlation between the two?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad John mentioned data, because if you want to do something about the problem of large social networks building detailed profiles of people and then using those to push content at them, the problem with going after algorithms, curating stuff, making an editorial decision, that's covered by the First Amendment. I don't think you can write a law that says you can't use computer code to suggest what people like, because code is an expression of human speech. There have been cases about things like encryption that say, you can't compel speech in this direction or that. Mm-hmm. So I don't, you can write a law that says algorithmic recommendations are the problem. There was a bill introduced, I think just last week, that would lift Section 230 protections for recommendations made by an algorithm. You know what company can afford the lawsuits that will result from that? Facebook.
Yeah.
Basic problem we have here is that we have this one company where we know they've had algorithms that have yielded incredibly bad outcomes, and worse in other countries. I was looking up, the New York Times did a piece about a similar case where Facebook researchers created a test user in Kerala, India, and just set this person to follow whatever was suggested. The quote from an unnamed researcher in the NYT's piece: following this test user's newsfeed, I've seen more images of dead people in the past 3 weeks than I've seen in my entire life total. And this is a country with a history of religious violence. They played with fire. Just today, the Washington Post had a piece explaining how some genius at Facebook decided when they added those new emoji reactions, like, hate, mad, whatever, they decided, the ones that weren't just like would have 5 times the value. And they soon discovered that things got a lot of angry emoji reactions, spread like crazy, and were also often misinformation and just unhelpful and unhealthy. Right. Facebook took another 2 years to decide maybe we should let go of our engagement with their precious goddamn obsession with their precious goddamn engagement for once, and just dial it back and just say an anger emoji reaction isn't worth any more than a like. But they're so desperate with getting people to spend more time on there when they already have 2 billion people. Like, let up already. Right. The problem is, although Mark Zuckerberg may seem a little sociopathic in some of these decisions, really for him, you can't write a law saying, hey, stop being such a jerk with no sense of responsibility for society at large. Otherwise, a lot of CEOs would go to jail. Right. So privacy protection in law on a federal basis would be good, although good luck getting that to happen. Mm-hmm. I do think splitting up Facebook, making it less powerful, a separate Instagram would at least have a chance to do something different. And for that matter, there is this lawsuit brought by a coalition of states led by Texas against Google that alleges really serious charges of collusion between Facebook and Google that seeks structural remedies, aka take a sledgehammer and split up the company. So boom, I just said something nice about the Republican Attorney General of Texas. That's not going to happen.
And I did record it. I did not.
You're on record now. We already have provisions in antitrust law to break up companies in cases of abuse of power. And I think we're going to see more cases like this brought. And for that matter, Google, that same lawsuit, makes some pretty serious charges that Google is using YouTube to cement its dominance of display advertising. And so, writing laws that are probably unconstitutional, not a good idea. Perhaps using the laws that have been on the books for decades, perhaps we should consider doing that instead.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I am a law that gives consumers the right to own and maybe even profit from their own data, which has been suggested by a lot of different people as being part of the solution.
Yeah. I agree with Stuart. There might be some business remedies that helps influence behavior.
Well, there is, just because one last thing about this, just because I'm working on an academic paper about it, right? So in doing the kinds of things that we're talking about that these companies do, they are taking away privacy, right? They're taking away data, information that you have about yourself, et cetera. In the process of doing that, what they are also taking away is your autonomy, your control over yourself to do things. And that's tied into, at least in the United States, into your liberty and freedom to do things. So it has a really direct effect on what you're able to do with your life, what these companies are doing right now. And I think that's, trying to communicate that to the general populace is a little tricky and difficult, but that's really what we're talking about here.
Well, and we're going to revisit this topic, I am sure, over the coming months. So let's not put this one on the shelf. The only observation I would make is the thing that scares me, and I think all of you would agree with this, is that the legislators who are involved making these decisions and influencing legislation, they just don't have, in most cases, the appropriate technical background to make these type of decisions. And they do have very youthful staffs in many cases that can help them kind of navigate through the issues. But as we've seen, every time there's some type of social media panel or testimony that goes on in Congress, some of the questions that get asked, you just kind of like, what the heck is going on? I mean, and maybe yes, all of us are in the tech space. We eat and breathe this every single day. But if you don't understand the issues from a technical standpoint, and I'm not talking about from an engineering standpoint, from a C++, writing code standpoint, but at least understand at a fairly basic level what these algorithms can do, some of the things that I think all of you brought up during your comments, I think we're in dangerous waters. So I know that we're going to revisit this at some point. Last topic we got to get to. We only have a few minutes here, and Stuart, I'll let you lead off with this. This is a great topic because everybody's been hailing remote working as this kind of a triumph of technology. It kept everybody sane for the last 2 years. All goodness, the remote learning from an educational standpoint, that's kind of helped. There has been a downside with it, and I think that's the point you made this morning when we were exchanging emails. So let's talk about that. I want to get your perspective on this topic.
Well, the main point, I've worked remotely almost my entire professional life, and I do have memories of when I was in an office and I met with my team, and that sort of thing. And I hear from people that communicate largely by text and email of a higher level of miscommunication because so much pressure is placed upon these intermittent text-based conversation tools without the face-to-face, and it engenders so much misunderstanding and puts a great deal in something that would have been a minor issue if you passed somebody in the hall and said, oh, by the way, did you do that thing that we did? Oh yeah, I'll get to it now, as opposed to sending somebody an email that says, by the way, I need your thing on this. All of a sudden that gets blown out of proportion. The relationships between the workers, there's no way to build any kind of teamwork or corporate culture when you lose that serendipitous communication. You lose that human contact, and all of a sudden everything gets blown out of proportion and creates animosities and other negative kind of interpersonal relationships that may not exist or would not exist if everybody was in one place at one time all together, just going to the coffee break room together and just having conversation. Oh, I dropped by your office here. Let me give you this. Those sorts of interactivities are completely gone, and it puts a lot more pressure on very inefficient other forms of communication, such as email and texting.
John, your reaction to that?
It's tricky for me too, because like Stuart, I used to be, part of an editorial staff and in my cubicle and office every day, et cetera, et cetera. And then for the last few years, obviously working remotely because I don't need to. I need to be able to travel and need flexibility in the schedule and to be able to test things. And an office wasn't very conducive to do that. I don't know that it's had such a negative impact. One of the advantages I've seen is that it's allowed people to reflect on the work that they're actually doing and whether they want to continue doing that work anymore or not. And that has shifted the balance of sort of power between, employers and employees. And I've liked that shift. I have to say, I've liked to see employees having more autonomy, having more say in what goes on with their work and making decisions like, this probably isn't the job for me before the employer makes that decision.
Right.
And I think ultimately that's a good thing because you want employees to be happy. You want them to be doing work that they feel fulfilled in, and they're going to do a better job if they do that. So I think in the end, it's a benefit. As with everything with the pandemic, who knows how long this is going to last or whether this is sort of a permanent new normal. It's a little odd in Manhattan because we have giant skyscrapers still virtually sitting empty, a lot of them, maybe 20% now of people coming in. So I don't know. Can we sustain that? We're going to find out.
Well, I want Rob to wrap this one up. But the thing that I think Stuart said, which I absolutely agree with, is that we have kind of migrated into this communications protocol orientation where very often, because I do it all day long, whether it's text messages, whether it's Slack, and when you're sending people, particularly people you haven't met, there's a number of people that I've been working with over the last year. I've never physically met them. I've seen them on a video conference call, but I'm constantly corresponding with them. And because all of us are writers, me late in my career, the key to great writing is reading something over again 3 or 4 or 5 times before you actually publish it. That does not happen most of the time with text messaging or messages on Twitter. Yes, there's a limitation. You're going to have so many characters that you can send out on a Twitter blast. Some of the limitations are a bit more liberal on other tools, but most people don't. They just don't review what they're about to hit the send.
And they don't express themselves very well.
Well, we had a president for 4 years that probably he might have been reelected had he had a better ability to resist hitting the send key. And hey, by the way, could you read that before you send it, because there might be a word or two that has completely the wrong connotation of what you want to communicate. So I really do believe. I think, Stuart, you've got a point here that I think people have been, really flummoxed with the way people react to a message inadvertently, because they just don't, review it appropriately because that desire to hit the send key and get that message out. Rob, I'll let you close on and get your thoughts, and we can close this one out.
So I've been working remotely for the past 10 years. So who are these coworkers of which you speak? But the last month, I have actually been to like 2 in-person conferences, and I'm flying to another one this weekend. And it's been really great to actually talk to people afterwards, to, shake hands and, have a drink, hopefully outdoors with nice weather, and you engage like functional human beings instead of people who are just in little boxes on the screen like we are right now. And so I'm glad we're getting back to that. And so to everyone listening, get vaccinated. It really works. Look at us there. That's my PSA. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
I mean, having said that, I have to admit, look, I'm going to NYU almost every day, right? I'm on campus almost every day. I'm in class talking to people and discussing topics almost every day. So I shouldn't say I love working remotely so much, because I really am enjoying that, and I'm getting a lot, obviously a lot of ideas out of that and working with people. So I certainly appreciate that. And yeah, there are some places you just can't, there's no substitute.
Yes, no, I agree. And, and we still, and the 4 of us still have not been in a single room since I think the last time
I know.
It was IFA. I think it was IFA.
Yes, my flights and hotel are booked.
Yeah, we have got to get together for a drink before the Giants win the Super Bowl, which they are going to. That's my prediction. So, Rob, Stuart, and John, thanks for taking the time to join me for today's podcast. For our viewing and listening audience, please make sure that you hit the like and subscribe buttons at the end of today's podcast. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Mark Vina Tech Guy. And until next time, have a great weekend.